Warning, censorship. Warning, censorship.
Sheila Gunn Reid for Rebel News, and this morning I started day 2 of a 3-day hearing in federal court that I've been covering for Rebel News. It's a challenge of Justin Trudeau's COVID jail system, wherein healthy Canadian citizens, upon arrival to their own country, are forced first to subject themselves to COVID detention for 3 days at an airport hotel before heading home to a mandatory 14-day quarantine, or maybe not home, but to a designated quarantine facility. Now, Rebel News is involved in this. We're suing the federal government as part of this hearing, alongside our former journalist, Cian Bexty, who himself was taken into one of these COVID hotels after covering a story for Rebel News in Florida. The Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms is also involved in this hearing, representing several individuals of different backgrounds from all across the country, but each one a Canadian citizen harmed by these measures. You can see all of my coverage from the first day of the hearing, including arguments made by our Rebel News lawyers from JSS Barristers at nocovidjails.com. And you can also pitch in to support our very important fight against the arbitrary detention of innocent Canadian citizens by donating to offset our legal costs at that same website, nocovidjails.com. Now, today, court is hearing from Jeffrey Rath. He's the lawyer for Dominic Colvin, the CEO of a cannabis company from Kelowna, BC, who is also suing the government over the COVID jail system after Colvin flew to his second home in the Caribbean before these mandatory quarantine measures just were put in place, basically overnight. Rath, in his arguments, pointed out that the government has produced no evidence of any instance of asymptomatic spread of COVID-19 in the entire country. And that came out when Rath cross-examined the head of biosecurity for the entire country, Kimby Barton. What this means is that though the government brought in the COVID jails on the justification that they were trying to prevent asymptomatic spread of COVID-19 and infringing on the civil liberties of Canadians to do it, it seems as though they're controlling a risk that actually doesn't exist. And Rath rightly pointed out in his arguments that asymptomatic is the new weird word that the government is using to describe healthy people. Rath questioned the efficacy of the PCR test as a means to justify the ongoing incarceration of Canadians, expressing serious concerns about false positives, amplification cycles, and the inability of the test to determine between past exposure and current infectiousness. Many of Rath's arguments hinge on the fact that the federal cabinet has a responsibility to impose the most minimally invasive means of quarantine. And it appears they haven't done that, nor has the cabinet produced any evidence that they considered any other measures of quarantine, because now the cabinet is claiming cabinet confidentiality, so they don't have to produce that evidence. One last thing Rath pointed out, which I think a lot of people may not know. If upon arrival in Canada through an airport, if a traveler is presenting symptoms of COVID-19 and declares that they are presenting symptoms of COVID-19, the traveler is sent directly home where they begin quarantine for 14 days. However, if a traveler arrives in Canada with a clear COVID test, they are then given a second COVID test upon arrival, then taken directly to a quarantine facility at their cost for 72 hours while they await the results of the second test. And then after they're released from there, they are required to go home and self-isolate for 14 days. What this all means is that the COVID jails are actually only for healthy people. Court is in break for lunch. I'll bring you a report when court wraps up at the end of the day. Now, if you'd like to follow along with all of our coverage and support the important work of fighting to stop the arbitrary airport incarceration of law-abiding, and as it would turn out, completely healthy Canadian citizens in Justin Trudeau's disgusting and dangerous COVID jails, please donate today at nocovidjails.com. For Rebel News, I'm Sheila Gunn Reid. To make it seem like the government was actually doing something about preventing the spread of the coronavirus, Justin Trudeau began incarcerating returning healthy Canadians in grotesque COVID jails, and then he charged them thousands of dollars for their own illegal detentions. We're fighting back, and if you'd like to help us by funding our legal challenge of these measures, please donate today at nocovidjails.com.